The bell above the door chimed twice, a lazy, rust-throated sound that cut through the humid August air like a warning. Because in Conway, Arkansas, population 812, strangers didn't just wander into Merle's Gas and Grill on a Thursday afternoon in the summer of 1977 without a reason. The screen door slapped shut behind him. Flies circled the overhead fan. The smell of burned coffee and motor oil hung thick enough to taste, mixing with the sweetness of peach pie cooling on the counter. Linoleum stuck to boot soles with each step, that tacky summer grip that spoke of decades without replacement. The man who entered wore a gray canvas jacket despite the heat, collar turned up, hat brim low. His boots were caked with red Arkansas clay, the kind that came from back roads nobody maintained anymore. He moved with the careful economy of someone who'd learned to make himself small, unremarkable. Merle wiped down the counter without looking up. At 63, she'd seen enough drifters, truckers, and trouble to know the difference. This man was all three. "Coffee," he said. Not a question. His voice carried gravel and distance. The word landed in the diner like a stone in still water. Conversation stopped. Old Pete Hutchins lowered his newspaper. The Walton brothers, fresh from their shift at the lumber mill, exchanged glances. Even little Sarah Martinez, 7 years old and coloring at the corner booth, while her mama worked the kitchen, looked up with wide brown eyes. "Just coffee?" Merle asked, her hand already reaching for the pot. "Just coffee." Something in those two words made the hair on her neck stand up. Not the words themselves, the weight behind them. Like a man who'd learned to ask for only what he needed and nothing more. He took the stool at the far end, back to the wall, eyes on the door. Military habit, Merle thought. She'd seen it before in her late husband, the way men who'd been to war always positioned themselves. The stranger's hands were scarred, deep white lines across the knuckles. Burns, maybe, or worse. Before you go any further into this story, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. And if you're already hooked, hit that like button and subscribe. Because what happens next will stay with you long after this video ends. The coffee sat untouched for 3 full minutes. That's when Tommy Reeves walked in. 22, cocky from 2 years at State College, home for the summer and already bored with small-town life. He'd been drinking. Everyone could smell the whiskey mixed with cheap cologne. "Well, well," Tommy announced to the room. "Look what crawled in off the highway." Merle shot him a warning look. "Tommy, not today." But Tommy was already moving closer, emboldened by the audience and the alcohol. "You know who this is?" He addressed the diner, not the stranger. "This is John Caldwell. Crazy John. My daddy told me. Stories." The name dropped like a match into gasoline. Whispers erupted. The Walton brothers stood up. Old Pete's newspaper crumpled in his fists. Even Sarah's mother, Rosa, appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face gone pale. The stranger, Caldwell, didn't move, didn't even blink. "They say you killed a man in Memphis," Tommy continued, feeding off the fear he'd ignited. "They say you're wanted in 3 states. They say a lot of things." Caldwell's voice was quiet, controlled. "Most of them wrong." "Then why don't you tell us the truth?" Tommy leaned against the counter, performance in full swing. "Why's a dangerous man like you in our town?" Caldwell lifted the coffee cup, took one slow sip, set it down with care. "Because," he said, "I was invited." The room froze. Merle's hand went to her chest. The Walton brothers sat back down, heavily. Old Pete's face transformed, fear melting into something else entirely. Recognition. "Oh my God," Pete whispered. August of 62. Caldwell's eyes found the old man. A slight nod. Nothing more. What happened in 62? Tommy demanded, his bravado cracking. But Pete was already moving toward the stranger, his arthritic hands shaking. The flood, he said. The night of the flood, when the levee broke. When half the town was underwater and the current took my granddaughter right out of my arms. The truth hung there, suspended. You weren't a stranger then, Pete continued, tears tracking down weathered cheeks. You were just some kid passing through. 20 years old, maybe, and you jumped in that black water when nobody else would. Caldwell said nothing. His coffee steamed between scarred hands. You pulled 8 people out that night. Pete's voice broke. Including my Annie. She's got 3 kids of her own now, living in Little Rock, alive because of you. The diner had gone cathedral quiet. Little Sarah slid out of her booth. She walked to Caldwell with the fearless curiosity of childhood, holding up her coloring page, a crayon drawing of a house with yellow windows. Are you a hero? She asked. Caldwell looked at the drawing, at the child, at the hope rendered in primary colors. No, he said gently. Just someone who was there. But Sarah had already climbed onto the stool beside him, returning to her coloring as if sitting next to legends was an everyday thing. Kindness echoes longest. Tommy Reeves stood frozen, shame replacing swagger. Merle refilled the coffee without being asked. The Walton brothers raised their mugs in silent salute. And in that moment, the stranger named Caldwell became something else entirely. A ghost made flesh. A story confirmed. A debt 15 years old finally acknowledged. But what nobody knew yet was why he'd really come back, or what he was running from. The whiskey bottle shattered against the wall at exactly 4:17 that afternoon, and with it, any illusion of peace. Because Tommy Reeves wasn't the only one in Conway who remembered John Caldwell, and not everyone remembered him as a hero. The glass exploded near the jukebox, spraying amber liquid across faded vinyl records and chrome trim. The man who'd thrown it stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the late sun, breathing hard. His name was Dale Mercer, and his hands were shaking with something that looked like rage, but smelled like fear. You got some nerve, Dale spat. Coming back here like nothing happened. Caldwell didn't turn around, didn't reach for anything. Just sat there with Sarah still coloring beside him, her crayon frozen mid-stroke. Dale, Merle's voice carried warning. Take it outside. Outside? Outside? Dale's laugh was ugly. This son of a bitch destroyed my family, and you want me to take it outside? The diner had emptied of air. Old Pete moved slowly toward Sarah, ready to shield her if things escalated. The Walton brothers positioned themselves between Dale and the counter, not taking sides yet, just creating space. Caldwell finally turned. His face was tired, infinitely tired. Your brother made his own choices, Dale. Don't. Dale's finger jabbed the air. Don't you dare talk about Michael like you didn't. Like I didn't what? Caldwell's voice was still quiet, but something hard had entered it. Like I didn't pull him out of that water too? Like I didn't give him CPR for 20 minutes while you stood on the bank and watched? The accusation landed like a fist. Dale's face went white, then red. He was never the same after. You know that. The brain damage, the seizures. He was alive. He killed himself 3 years later. Dale's voice cracked. Hanged himself in our daddy's barn because he couldn't live with what the water did to him. So don't you stand there and act like you saved everybody, because you didn't save Michael. You just gave him 3 more years of suffering." The silence that followed was brutal. Sarah had stopped coloring entirely. Tears tracked down her small face, though she didn't make a sound. Rosa appeared and gently guided her daughter toward the kitchen, whispering soft Spanish words of comfort. Caldwell stood up slowly. His hands were steady now, hanging loose at his sides. "You're right," he said. Dale blinked. "What?" "You're right, I pulled him out. I breathed air into his lungs. I got his heart beating again. And maybe—" Caldwell's voice caught, just for a second. "Maybe that was the cruelest thing I could have done. Sometimes salvation looks like failure. I think about it," Caldwell continued. "Every person I pulled out that night. I think about what I gave them and what I took away. The choices I made in seconds that echoed for years. Your brother was a good man, Dale. Before and after. What happened to him wasn't fair. But it wasn't your fault either." The last sentence hung there. An offering, a truth Dale had needed to hear for 3 years. Dale's shoulders sagged. The rage drained out of him, leaving only grief. "Why'd you come back?" he whispered. "After 15 years. Why now?" "Because someone asked me to." "Who?" Before Caldwell could answer, a black Lincoln pulled up outside. 1977 model, pristine, with white wall tires that had no business on Conway's dusty roads. The engine purred with money. The driver who emerged wore a suit that cost more than most people in the diner earned in a month. 70s cut, wide lapels, but tailored to perfection. His shoes reflected the afternoon sun. He walked into Merle's Gas and Grill like he owned it. Maybe he did. "Gentlemen," he said, removing expensive sunglasses. "Ladies, I apologize for the disturbance." His eyes found Caldwell. "I see you got my message." Merle's hand went to her mouth. "Mr. Hartley?" James Hartley smiled. "Hello, Merle. Been a long time." It had been. 15 years, to be exact. Back when Hartley was just another Conway kid who'd survived the flood and then disappeared to make his fortune in Little Rock real estate. Now he was the richest man the town had ever produced, and according to the rumor mill, he'd never forgotten where he came from. "You sent for him?" Old Pete asked, pointing at Caldwell. "I did." "Why?" Hartley's smile faded. "Because I'm buying the town. Every acre, every business, every home. And I wanted the one man who saved it to know before it happened." The words detonated like grenades. Buying the town. Every acre. "That's impossible," Merle breathed. "It's very possible," Hartley corrected. "I've already purchased 63% of the properties through various holding companies. The rest will follow. Conway, Arkansas, will be redeveloped into a planned community. Shopping centers, condominiums, progress." The Walton brothers were on their feet. Dale Mercer's grief had transformed back into rage, but redirected now. Even Tommy Reeves looked sick. "You can't just—" "I can," Hartley interrupted. "And I am. Everyone will be compensated fairly. More than fairly. Most of you will make more money than you've seen in your lives. You'll just need to find somewhere else to live." Caldwell's voice cut through the chaos. "And if they don't want to sell?" Hartley turned to him. "Then the county will exercise eminent domain. I've already secured the necessary political support. This is happening, John. I brought you here as a courtesy. You saved my life once. I wanted you to understand that I'm saving this town now, from poverty, from irrelevance, from dying slowly, by killing it quickly." The two men faced each other, hero and millionaire, past and future. "Why?" Caldwell asked. Why destroy the place you came from? Something flickered in Hartley's eyes, something wounded. Because this place already destroyed me. It destroyed all of us. We just don't know it yet. And with that cryptic statement, he turned to leave. One more thing, he called from the doorway. I'm hosting a meeting tomorrow night. 8 p.m., the old community center. Everyone's invited. I'll answer all your questions then. He looked directly at Caldwell. I hope you'll be there, John. After all, you're the only one who knows what it's like to make an impossible choice and live with it forever. The Lincoln pulled away, leaving silence and dust. Merle sank onto a stool. Dale Mercer walked out without another word. The Walton brothers started talking in low, angry tones about lawyers and property rights and things that didn't matter because money always won. Caldwell returned to his coffee. It had gone cold. Little Sarah emerged from the kitchen, her coloring page finished. She'd added a new figure to her crayon house, a man standing in the doorway drawn in gray. Is he going to take our house? She asked Caldwell. The question every child shouldn't have to ask. I don't know, sweetheart. Will you stop him? Caldwell looked at this 7-year-old girl, at her hope rendered in Crayola colors, at her absolute faith that heroes existed and they fixed things. I don't know, he said again. But something in his scarred hands had started to shake. Not from fear, from something older and deeper, a rage he'd learned to bury 15 years ago, when he'd realized that sometimes saving people wasn't enough. That sometimes the water won anyway, just slower. What would you do if your entire world was being erased by a checkbook? If the very ground beneath your feet was for sale to the highest bidder, and the man writing the check claimed he was doing you a favor? The people of Conway were about to find out they had less than 24 hours to decide. And the stranger they'd called a hero was about to remember why he'd stayed away so long. The community center smelled of old wood, mildew, and decades of potluck dinners absorbed into the walls. Because some buildings hold memory the way skin holds scars. Permanent, faded, but never fully gone. By 7:45, every folding chair was occupied. People stood along the walls, packed shoulder to shoulder, their faces tight with worry and anger. The August heat made the room sweltering despite open windows. Babies fussed, men loosened their ties. Women fanned themselves with church bulletins pulled from purses. Caldwell stood in the back corner watching, still wearing that gray canvas jacket, still positioned where he could see the exits. Rosa Martinez sat in the third row, Sarah asleep in her lap despite the noise. The girl clutched her coloring page, the one with the gray man in the doorway. Even in sleep, her small fingers wouldn't let it go. Merle had closed the diner early, first time in 17 years. She sat beside old Pete, their faces carved from the same worry. The Walton brothers had brought their wives, their children, 3 generations of Conway roots about to be ripped from the ground. Dale Mercer stood near the door, arms crossed, jaw clenched. He hadn't looked at Caldwell once since entering. At exactly 8 p.m., James Hartley arrived. He'd changed from the expensive suit into something more casual, a calculation Caldwell recognized, trying to look like one of them. But the watch on his wrist cost more than most of these families earned in a year, and no amount of denim could hide that fact. Thank you all for coming, Hartley began, his voice smooth and practiced. I know this news has been shocking, but I want you to understand something. I'm not your enemy. I'm your salvation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Conway is dying, Hartley continued. The lumber mill closes next year. The highway bypass already killed half your businesses. Young people leave and never come back. In 10 years, this town will be a ghost story. I'm offering you a chance to leave with dignity, with money in your pockets, with futures. This is our future, one of the Walton brothers shouted. Our families have been here for 4 generations. And what will the 5th generation inherit? Hartley shot back. Poverty? Declining schools? No opportunities? I'm giving you a way out. We don't want out, Merle said, standing. Her voice shook but held. We want our home. Your home is already gone. You just haven't admitted it yet. The cruelty of truth. Caldwell watched Hartley's face as he spoke, saw something beneath the polished confidence, something raw. This wasn't just business. This was personal. I'll pay fair market value plus 30%, Hartley announced. For every property, every business. I'll cover all moving costs. I'll provide job placement assistance. I'll even establish a trust fund for Conway residents to access for 5 years after the sale. You'll walk away better than you came. Better? Rosa stood up, careful not to wake Sarah. Her English carried the melody of her native Spanish. Better is my daughter knowing her neighbors? Better is walking to school without fear? Better is a community that takes care of each other? You cannot buy better, Mr. Hartley. You can only destroy it. Applause erupted. Hartley's jaw tightened. I understand sentiment, he said. But sentiment doesn't pay medical bills, doesn't send kids to college, doesn't matter to a man who forgot where he came from, old Pete interrupted. Jimmy Hartley, I remember when you were 8 years old, crying on my porch because your daddy drank up the grocery money again. Merle's mama fed you 3 nights a week. The Waltons gave your family their old clothes. This whole town raised you when your parents couldn't. Hartley's face had gone white. And the night of the flood, Pete continued, standing now, voice gaining strength. When the water took you under, when you were drowning in that black current, who pulled you out? Every eye turned to Caldwell, the stranger in the corner who'd been watching in silence. John Caldwell breathed life back into your lungs, Pete said. Carried you to high ground when you were too weak to walk. Sat with you in the church gymnasium for 3 hours while you coughed up river water and cried for your mama. And now you come back here, rich and powerful, trying to erase the very place that saved your life? The silence was devastating. Hartley's hands were shaking. That was 15 years ago. Some debts don't expire. I don't owe this town anything. The words exploded out of Hartley. This town watched my father beat my mother, watched us go hungry, watched us suffer and did just enough to ease their own consciences, but never enough to actually help. You want to talk about the flood? The flood was the best thing that ever happened to me because it washed away every reason to stay. The confession hung in the air like smoke. So yes, Hartley continued, voice breaking, John Caldwell pulled me out of the water, and I spent the next 15 years wishing he hadn't. Wishing I'd drowned with all my memories of this God-forsaken place. But I didn't. I survived. And I clawed my way to success so I'd never have to beg Conway for scraps again. So I could come back and finish what the flood started, washing this place away for good. Understanding dawned across faces. This wasn't about progress or profit. This was revenge. Jimmy, Merle said softly, we didn't know how bad it was for you. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. He was right, Caldwell thought. They'd all seen the bruises on his mother, the hunger in the boy's eyes, the violence that leaked from that house like poison. And they'd offered band-aids for bullet wounds. Charity without intervention, kindness without courage. Sarah stirred in Rosa's arms, waking. She looked around with sleepy confusion, then saw Hartley standing at the front of the room. "Are you the bad man?" she asked, her child's voice cutting through the tension. Hartley looked at her, at this 7-year-old girl with her crayon drawing and her innocent question. "No, sweetheart," he said. "I'm just a man who learned that you can't save a dying thing by loving it harder. My mama says love is what makes things grow." "Your mama is wrong." Rosa's arms tightened around her daughter. The room vibrated with suppressed anger, at Hartley, at themselves, at the truth they'd been avoiding for 15 years. Caldwell finally moved. He walked down the center aisle, boots echoing on wooden floors, until he stood face to face with the man he'd saved. "You asked me why I came back," Caldwell said quietly. "I came because I wanted to see if saving your life mattered, if it made any difference at all." "And?" Hartley's voice was barely above a whisper. "It didn't. You drowned anyway, just slower." The words landed like stones. "But here's what you haven't figured out yet," Caldwell continued. "You think destroying this place will make you free. It won't. It'll just prove that the water won. That the scared, hurt kid you were is still running from a flood that happened 15 years ago." Hartley's eyes glistened. "You don't know what it was like." "You're right. I don't. But I know what it's like to save something and watch it die anyway. I know what it's like to wonder if you made the right choice. And I know that revenge always costs more than you think you can afford." Hope whispers in unexpected places. For a moment, something shifted in Hartley's expression. Something young and wounded and desperate for permission to be different. Then his phone rang. He answered it. Listened. His face transformed. The vulnerability closing like a door. The businessman returning. "That was my attorney," he said. "The county has officially approved the eminent domain proceedings. This meeting was a courtesy, not a negotiation. The sale begins Monday morning." He walked toward the exit, then paused beside Caldwell. "You should have let me drown," he whispered. And then he was gone. The room erupted into chaos, shouting, crying, people demanding answers that nobody had. Rosa held Sarah close. Merle wept into old Pete's shoulder. The Walton brothers talked of lawyers they couldn't afford. Caldwell stood in the center of it all, remembering why he'd left 15 years ago. Because sometimes the people you save don't stay saved. But what nobody noticed was Sarah, slipping from her mother's arms, walking to where Hartley had stood, picking up something he'd dropped in his hurry to leave. A photograph. Old, water-damaged, barely held together. It showed a young boy, maybe 8 years old, standing in front of Merle's gas and grill, smiling, holding an ice cream cone, happy, whole, before the bruises and the hunger and the flood. "Mama," Sarah said, holding up the picture, "why is the bad man crying in his car?" And through the window, they could all see it. James Hartley, millionaire destroyer of towns, sitting in his Lincoln with his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with 15 years of grief he'd never let himself feel. The question was no longer whether they could stop him. The question was whether anyone would try to save him the way he'd once been saved. The knock came at 11:43 p.m., echoing through the empty diner like a gunshot. Because some confrontations can't wait for morning, and some truths demand the cover of darkness. Merle had been cleaning the same coffee cup for 10 minutes, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind wrestled with impossible math. How to afford a lawyer, where to move, whether her life savings would even cover first and last month's rent in Little Rock. The knock made her drop the cup. It shattered in the sink. Through the glass door, she could see him. James Hartley, still in his casual clothes, looking smaller somehow than he had at the community center. Younger, lost. She should have locked the door, should have called someone, should have done anything except what she did. She let him in. "We're closed," she said, but without conviction. "I know." Hartley stood just inside the threshold, not moving farther. "I saw your light on. I was driving past and I just..." He stopped, started again. "Do you have any coffee?" The question was so normal, so achingly ordinary, that Merle found herself nodding. "Sit down." He took the same stool Caldwell had occupied that afternoon. Merle poured coffee with hands that had steadied. This was familiar territory, feeding people, offering warmth, the rituals that had sustained her through 30 years of running this place. "Black, right?" she asked. "You always took it black." Hartley looked up, surprised she remembered. "Yeah." The coffee sat between them like a peace offering. Outside, crickets sang their August chorus. A semi rolled past on the highway, its Jake brake growling into the distance. "My mama used to bring me here," Hartley said suddenly. After the bad nights. She'd scrape together enough change for a slice of pie and we'd split it. She'd tell me stories about getting out of Conway someday, moving to a city, starting over. Merle sat down across from him. "I remember. She never made it out. Died when I was 16. Cancer, but really it was just..." He gestured vaguely. "Everything else. The accumulated weight of it all." "I know. I was at the funeral. You gave me $100 in an envelope. Said it was for expenses. I used it to buy a bus ticket to Little Rock the next morning." The confession hung there. Merle had wondered for 15 years why he'd disappeared right after his mother's burial. Now she knew. "You were just a kid, Jimmy. I was old enough to know I'd die if I stayed." Hartley's hands wrapped around the coffee cup. "Old enough to understand that sometimes leaving is the only form of survival you have left. Kindness can't erase cruelty." "So why come back?" Merle asked. "Why not just let Conway fade away on its own?" Hartley was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I'm 43 years old, and I'm worth $17 million, and I still wake up screaming from nightmares about this place. Because every success I've had feels hollow. Because I keep waiting to feel safe, and I never do. And I thought..." His voice cracked. "I thought if I could destroy it, tear it down and rebuild it into something clean and new, maybe I could finally be free. The truth behind the revenge." "But that's not how it works," Merle said gently. "No." Hartley's laugh was bitter. "No, it's not. I saw that photograph, the one I dropped. Sarah found it. I'd been carrying it in my pocket for 3 months. Me at 8 years old, right here, before everything went wrong. I look at that kid, and I don't even recognize him. He's still in there, Jimmy. Is he? Because all I feel is rage and grief and this desperate need to make everyone hurt the way I hurt. And that's not the kid in the picture. That's the monster my father created." The self-awareness was devastating. Merle reached across the counter and took his hand. His fingers were shaking. "You're not a monster. You're a hurt person who never got help. There's a difference." "Is there? I'm about to destroy an entire town." "You haven't yet." The words settled between them. Outside, a car pulled up, footsteps on gravel. The door opened and Caldwell walked in, followed by Old Pete, the Walton brothers, Dale Mercer, and Rosa Martinez. No Sarah this time. The girl was home, asleep, dreaming whatever 7-year-olds dreamed. Hartley stood up, defensive. What is this? Sit down, Jimmy, old Pete said, not unkindly. We need to talk. They arranged themselves around the counter. This unlikely congregation gathered at midnight in a diner that smelled of coffee and regret. We spent the evening talking, Pete began. All of us? About you? About what happened? About what we didn't do when we should have. Pete, you don't need to. Yes, we do, Rosa interrupted. Her English was careful, deliberate. We saw the bruises. We heard the yelling. We knew your father was violent and your mother was suffering, and we did nothing. We gave food and old clothes and thought that was enough. It was not enough. We were cowards, Merle added. We told ourselves it wasn't our business, that families had the right to privacy, that we couldn't interfere. But those were excuses. We knew better, and we did less. Hartley's eyes were wet. Why are you telling me this? Because, Dale Mercer said, stepping forward, I blame John Caldwell for saving my brother when maybe he shouldn't have. I blamed him for making a choice in seconds that I couldn't even make with years to think about it. And I realized tonight that I've been doing the same thing to you. Blaming you for trying to survive when we're the ones who failed to protect you. The apologies came then. Halting, imperfect. Years too late, but offered anyway. Each person in that diner confessing their complicity in the suffering of a child they'd all known was hurting. What would you do if you realized you'd watched a child drown on dry land? If you'd seen the bruises and heard the screams and told yourself it wasn't your place to intervene? If you'd offered charity instead of salvation because salvation required courage you didn't have? This doesn't change anything, Hartley said, but his voice lacked conviction. The sale is already in motion. The legal mechanisms are in place. I can't just... You can, Caldwell said quietly. He'd been standing in the back, watching, but now he moved forward. I've seen the paperwork. You have 72 hours before the final county approval. You can withdraw. And then what? Just leave Conway to die slowly instead of quickly? Or help it live? Hartley laughed. With what? My money? Yes. The single word fell like a stone. You want me to save the town I've been trying to destroy? I want you to finish what the flood started, Caldwell said. Not by washing it away, but by helping it rebuild. The lumber mill is closing. Buy it. Convert it to something sustainable. The businesses are failing. Invest in them. The young people are leaving. Create reasons to stay. Use your $17 million to prove that the scared kid in that photograph wasn't wrong to hope. That's insane. It's redemption. Hartley stared at Caldwell, at this man who'd pulled him from black water 15 years ago and was now offering to pull him from a different kind of drowning. I don't know if I can, Hartley whispered. I don't know if I'm capable of building instead of destroying. Neither did I, Caldwell replied. After the flood, after I'd pulled 8 people out and watched some of them suffer for it, I left. Spent 15 years running because I didn't know if saving people was the right thing or the cruelest thing. But then Merle called me, asked me to come back. And I realized that the only way to know if it mattered is to stay and find out. Merle's head snapped up. I didn't call you. Caldwell smiled. I know. I lied. I called myself. Decided it was time to stop running. The revelation shifted something in the room. If Caldwell could come back to face his ghosts, maybe Hartley could too. 72 hours, Pete said. That's all we're asking. Don't make the decision tonight. Sleep on it. Look at that photograph again. Remember who you were before the world taught you to hate it. Hartley stood up. His coffee sat untouched, gone cold. I should go. Nobody stopped him, but as he reached the door, Rosa spoke. Mr. Hartley, my daughter asked me tonight why the bad man was crying. I told her that sometimes people cry because they remember when they were good. She said we should help them remember more. The wisdom of 7 years old. Hartley left without responding. The Lincoln's engine started. Taillights disappeared into the August darkness. The group sat in silence. Think he'll withdraw? One of the Walton brothers finally asked. I don't know, Caldwell admitted. But we gave him something he hasn't had in 15 years. What's that? Permission to be different than his pain. Outside, the Conway night wrapped around them. Somewhere in that darkness, a millionaire wrestled with the choice between revenge and redemption. Somewhere, a 7-year-old girl slept with a crayon drawing of hope. Somewhere, the ghosts of the flood still whispered through the current. And in exactly 71 hours and 17 minutes, they would all find out which choice he'd made. The rain started at 3 a.m. on Saturday morning, hammering the tin roof of Merle's gas and grill like 1,000 angry fists. Because nature has a sense of timing, and sometimes weather mirrors the chaos brewing in human hearts. Caldwell hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in the small room above the diner that Merle kept for emergencies. A cot, a lamp, walls thin enough to hear the highway trucks rolling past. He sat by the window watching lightning fracture the sky, remembering another storm 15 years ago when the levee broke and the world turned to black water. His phone rang at 3:17. Unknown number. Caldwell. Heavy breathing on the other end. Then, it's James. I need... A pause. I need you to come to the community center. Now. The line went dead. Caldwell was pulling on his boots when Merle appeared in the doorway, bathrobe wrapped tight, hair in curlers. What's wrong? I don't know yet. I'm coming with you. Merle. That boy's been alone with his demons for 15 years. He doesn't get to face them alone tonight. They drove through the downpour in Merle's ancient pickup, windshield wipers barely keeping pace with the rain. The community center was dark, except for one light in the main room. Hartley's Lincoln sat outside, driver's door hanging open, rain pouring onto leather seats. Inside, they found him. He'd pulled every chair into the center of the room and built a kind of monument, photographs, documents, objects arranged in concentric circles. The water-damaged picture of 8-year-old Jimmy holding an ice cream cone sat at the center. Around it, medical bills from his mother's cancer treatment. Report cards with straight A's and teacher comments about a bright but troubled boy. A child's drawing of a house with no windows. Newspaper clippings about the flood. And in the outer ring, the legal documents for the Conway acquisition, each page marked with red ink. Hartley sat cross-legged in front of this arrangement, soaking wet from the rain, his expensive watch lying discarded nearby. Jimmy, Merle said softly. What is this? Evidence, he replied without looking up. I spent all night going through my storage unit, everything I've kept from Conway, everything I told myself I'd thrown away but couldn't. And I realized something. He finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. I've been trying to destroy the wrong thing. Caldwell knelt beside him, careful not to disturb the arrangement. What do you mean? I thought I hated Conway. I thought I wanted to tear it down because it represented everything I'd suffered. But that's not it. Hartley picked up the photograph of his younger self. I hate this kid. I hate how weak he was, how helpless, how he let his father hurt him and his mother die and didn't fight back. I've spent $17 million trying to prove he doesn't exist anymore. The rain hammered harder. But he does exist, Hartley continued. He's still inside me, still 8 years old and terrified and desperate for someone to save him. And I realized tonight that destroying Conway won't kill him. It'll just prove he was right to be afraid. Merle sat down on his other side. Oh, sweetheart. I called my therapist at 2 a.m., woke her up, asked her the question I've been avoiding for 20 years. Am I going to be like my father? Hartley's voice cracked. She said no. Said the fact I'm asking means I'm already different. But I don't feel different. I feel like I'm one bad decision away from becoming him. Some battles happen in silence. Your father destroyed things because it made him feel powerful, Caldwell said, quietly. You're trying to destroy things because you're in pain. That's not the same. Isn't it? No, because you stopped. You called for help. You're sitting here at 3 a.m. surrounded by evidence of who you were and who you're afraid of becoming. Your father never did that. Never questioned himself. Never sought redemption. Thunder cracked so close the building shook. I don't know how to be different, Hartley whispered. I don't know how to build instead of destroy. Nobody does at first, Merle said. You learn by doing, by making mistakes, by trying again. What if I fail? Then you fail. But at least you fail trying to be the man that 8-year-old boy needed someone to be. The words hung in the storm-charged air. Hartley stared at the photograph for a long time. Then he reached for the legal documents in the outer ring. One by one, he began tearing them up. I'm withdrawing the acquisition, he said. First thing Monday morning. Conway stays. Relief flooded through Caldwell, but he held up a hand. That's not enough. Hartley looked up, startled. What? Withdrawing isn't redemption. It's just avoiding harm. If you really want to honor that kid in the picture, you need to do more than not destroy his hometown. You need to help save it. I already offered that. You all rejected it. Because we didn't trust your motives, Caldwell said. But I'm looking at you now, and I see someone who's ready to do the work. So here's my challenge. Put your money where your pain is. Invest in Conway not as revenge, but as reparation. Not to erase the past, but to build a different future. Hartley's hands were shaking. I don't know if I can. Yes, you do. Because that's what someone did for you 15 years ago. They pulled you out of the water when it would have been easier to let you drown. Now it's your turn. The full circle of salvation. Outside, the storm was beginning to ease. The rain softened from downpour to steady drumming. Lightning retreated to distant flickers on the horizon. I'll need help, Hartley said finally. I don't know anything about running a town or what people actually need or... Then ask them, Merle interrupted. That's what community means. We figure it out together. A sound made them all turn. Rosa Martinez stood in the doorway, Sarah beside her in pajamas and rain boots, holding an umbrella decorated with cartoon butterflies. We saw the lights, Rosa explained. Sarah insisted we check. The little girl walked straight to Hartley, her rain boots squelching on the wooden floor. She looked at the monument he'd built, at the torn legal documents, at the tears on his face. Are you still the bad man? She asked. Hartley wiped his eyes. I'm trying not to be. Good. Sarah held out her hand. In it was a crayon drawing, new, made tonight. It showed the same house with yellow windows, but this time 2 figures stood in the doorway. One gray, one in bright colors. This is you. She pointed to the gray figure. And this is you when you're happy. Mama says sometimes we have to draw the happy version first, so we remember what we're trying to be. The wisdom of children. Hartley took the drawing with trembling hands. Thank you, Sarah. You're welcome. Will you help fix the playground? The swings are broken, and Mama says we can't afford new ones. The request was so simple, so immediate, so achingly practical, that it cut through years of theoretical redemption and landed on solid ground. Yes, Hartley said. I'll fix the playground and the school roof, and help the Walton brothers upgrade their equipment, and invest in Rosa's dream of expanding her catering business, and whatever else this town needs. Why? Sarah asked, with the directness only 7-year-olds possess. Hartley looked at Caldwell, at Merle, at the monument of his past spread across the floor. Because someone once saved my life, he said, and I'm finally ready to start living it. Dawn was breaking. The storm had passed. Through the community center windows, the first light touched Conway's streets, washing everything in gold. But 3 miles away, on Highway 49, a black SUV with tinted windows was pulling into town. Its occupants had been driving all night from Little Rock. They carried briefcases full of legal documents and injunctions. They represented the holding companies Hartley had used to acquire 63% of Conway's properties, and they had no intention of letting those investments disappear just because their client had developed a conscience. The real battle was about to begin. The black SUV rolled to a stop in front of Merle's Gas and Grill at 7:30 a.m., its engine ticking in the post-storm silence. Because sometimes the fight for redemption requires defending it against the machinery of your own past mistakes. Caldwell saw them first. 3 men in suits, carrying leather briefcases, moving with the purposeful stride of people who'd traveled a long way to deliver bad news. He was helping Merle set up chairs on the diner's porch. The humidity after the storm made inside unbearable. When the lead attorney approached. "We're looking for James Hartley," the man said. No introduction, no pleasantries. "We understand he's been in Conway." "He's at the community center," Merle replied, setting down a chair with more force than necessary. "What's this about?" The attorney smiled without warmth. "Business, private business." They were gone before Caldwell could respond, their SUV kicking up gravel as it turned toward Main Street. "This is bad," Merle said. "Yes, it is." By the time Caldwell reached the community center, a crowd had already gathered. Word traveled fast in small towns, especially when expensive lawyers showed up before breakfast. The Walton brothers stood on the steps. Dale Mercer leaned against his truck. Old Pete sat on a bench, watching. Rosa held Sarah's hand, the girl's butterfly umbrella still dripping from last night's rain. Inside, the confrontation was already underway. "Completely outside your authority," the lead attorney was saying. His name was Richard Vance, according to the business card he'd slapped on the table. "You don't have the power to unilaterally withdraw these acquisitions." Hartley stood his ground, though exhaustion lined his face. "I established the holding companies. I provided the capital. I can absolutely withdraw." "Not when you have partners." Vance opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "When you set up Conway Development LLC, you brought in 3 additional investors. They each hold 20%. You can't dissolve the entity without majority consent, which you don't have." The words landed like a punch. "What partners?" Hartley's voice was dangerous. "I established that company alone. You established it using loans from Monroe Capital Partners. The terms of those loans included equity conversion clauses. You signed them 14 months ago." Perhaps you should read contracts more carefully before signing. Caldwell watched Hartley's face go white. In his rush to acquire Conway, to build his revenge, he'd been maneuvered into giving away control. "Who are these partners?" Hartley demanded. Vance smiled. "I'm not at liberty to say, but they're very interested in ensuring the Conway development project moves forward as planned. The county approval goes through in 68 hours. The acquisitions will proceed. Your emotional crisis doesn't change the legal reality. This is my town. No, Mr. Hartley, this is an investment opportunity, and you're a minority stakeholder who's having second thoughts. Fortunately, the majority has no such hesitations. The cruelty of paperwork. I'll buy them out, Hartley said. Whatever their equity is worth, I'll pay double. They're not interested in selling. They're interested in a $17 million development deal that will triple their investment in 3 years. Caldwell stepped forward. Who sent you, Vance? The attorney's eyes flickered with recognition. You must be the local hero. John Caldwell, correct? The man who saved young James from drowning? He made the title sound like an insult. I represent the legal interests of Conway Development LLC and its majority stakeholders. That's all you need to know. No, a new voice said from the doorway. That's not all we need to know. Agent Sarah Chen walked in, FBI badge displayed, followed by 2 other federal agents. Behind them, looking pale but determined, stood Patricia Hoffman's daughter, Emma Hoffman, an investigative journalist from the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Richard Vance, Agent Chen said, you're under investigation for conspiracy to commit fraud, illegal land acquisition, and racketeering. The partners you represent are shell companies controlled by the Dennison Group, which is currently the subject of a federal investigation into predatory real estate practices across 6 states. The room went silent. Vance's composure cracked. You have no jurisdiction here. Actually, we do. Conway Development LLC has been flagging in our investigation for 3 months. We've been watching capital flows, tracking the shell companies, building a case. When Mr. Hartley contacted my office yesterday asking about the legal structure of his holding companies, we accelerated our timeline. Hartley looked stunned. I called the FBI yesterday? At 4:30 p.m., Agent Chen confirmed. You said you'd made a terrible mistake and needed help understanding what you'd gotten into. That call gave us probable cause to move forward. Emma Hoffman stepped forward, holding a recording device. I've been investigating the Dennison Group for 8 months. They target small towns in financial distress, convince wealthy individuals to front acquisition deals, then use legal manipulation to take control and force sales. Conway is their 17th target. The other 16 communities no longer exist. The true scope of danger. Mr. Hartley, Emma continued, you were a mark. They researched your background, found your connection to Conway, and set up the whole scenario to make you think destroying this town was your idea. The loans, the easy capital, the legal advice, all calculated to put you in a position where you'd do their dirty work and they'd reap the profit. Hartley sank into a chair. I was just their weapon. Yes, Agent Chen said, but you're also our witness. If you're willing to testify about how they manipulated you, we can shut down the entire operation. Vance was already moving toward the door, but the other FBI agents blocked his exit. You're not under arrest yet, Mr. Vance, Agent Chen said, but you're not leaving either. We have some questions. What would you do if you discovered your revenge had been manufactured by someone else? If your deepest pain had been weaponized to profit strangers who didn't care about your suffering, only your money? The community center filled as word spread. More people arrived. Merle, the entire Martinez family. Dozens of Conway residents who'd spent the night terrified of losing their homes. Hartley stood up slowly. He looked at the faces surrounding him. People he'd tried to displace. People who'd failed him as a child. People who'd offered forgiveness he didn't think he deserved. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was rough. "I'm so sorry. I thought I was taking control of my life, but I was just..." He gestured helplessly. "I was just being used all over again, like when I was a kid." "The difference," old Pete said, moving through the crowd, "is that this time you stopped it. This time you asked for help. But I almost destroyed everything." "Almost doesn't count," Rosa said firmly. "My grandmother used to say, it's not the falling that defines you. It's whether you get back up. You got back up, Mr. Hartley. That matters." Sarah pulled away from her mother and walked to Hartley. She held out the crayon drawing she'd made the night before. The house with two figures in the doorway, one gray and one in bright colors. "You can keep this," she said, "to remember." Hartley took the drawing with shaking hands. "Thank you." "You're welcome. Will you still fix the playground?" Despite everything, the lawyers, the FBI, the revelation of manipulation, Hartley laughed. Actually laughed. "Yes, sweetheart. I'll still fix the playground." Agent Chen was already on her phone, coordinating with other field offices. Vance sat in a folding chair, his expensive suit looking rumpled now, his arrogance deflated. Emma Hoffman was taking notes, her journalist's instinct already shaping the story that would expose the Dennison Group's predatory practices. But Caldwell was watching Hartley, seeing something shift in the man's posture, the weight of shame beginning to lift, replaced by something lighter. Not forgiveness yet. That would take time, but possibility. The possibility that redemption wasn't a destination, but a direction. "I want to make a statement," Hartley said to Agent Chen. "I'll testify about everything, how they approached me, what they promised, how they structured the deals, all of it." "That will help tremendously," Chen replied. "But Mr. Hartley, you should know, you'll likely face charges too. Conspiracy, at minimum. Your cooperation will count in your favor, but you're not walking away clean." "I know." Hartley looked around the room. "But maybe that's appropriate. Maybe accountability is the first step toward actually being different. Justice and mercy, balanced." Dale Mercer stepped forward. The man who'd thrown a whiskey bottle in rage 2 days ago, who'd blamed Caldwell for saving his brother, who'd carried grief and anger for 3 years. "I was wrong about you," he said to Hartley. "I thought you were just a rich bastard destroying our home for profit. But you're just another person who got hurt and didn't know how to heal. I understand that. And if you're really willing to help Conway instead of destroying it, then I'm willing to help you." He extended his hand. Hartley stared at it for a long moment. Then he took it. The handshake lasted only seconds, but in a room full of witnesses, it meant everything. Outside, the August sun was burning away the last of the storm clouds. The air smelled clean, washed, new. Through the community center windows, Conway looked exactly as it always had. A little worn, a little forgotten, but still standing, still worth saving. "What happens now?" Merle asked. Agent Chen closed her phone. "Now we process the scene, collect evidence, and begin the legal proceedings against the Dennison Group. The county approval for eminent domain will be blocked pending the federal investigation. Conway stays exactly as it is." "And him?" One of the Walton brothers gestured toward Hartley. That's up to him, Chen replied. And up to you. Whether you want to accept his help or tell him to leave and never come back. The choice given to the people who deserved it. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to Hartley, this man who'd tried to destroy them and been destroyed in the process. This millionaire who'd been revealed as just another victim. This prodigal son who'd come home carrying revenge and left it in pieces on the floor. It was Rosa who spoke first. My daughter believes in second chances, she said. And who am I to argue with the wisdom of 7 years old? If Mr. Hartley wants to help, we should let him. Murmurs of agreement. Not everyone. Some faces remained hard, skeptical, but enough. Enough to build on. Then let's get to work, Hartley said. And for the first time in 15 years, when he thought about Conway, Arkansas, he didn't feel rage or grief or the desperate need to escape. He felt something dangerously close to hope. 3 months later, on a crisp November afternoon, they dedicated the new playground with brass plaques and apple cider. Because some endings are really beginnings, and some debts can only be paid forward. The sound of children's laughter filled the air, a sound Conway hadn't heard in abundance for years. Sarah Martinez was first on the new swings, her mother watching with tears in her eyes. The Walton brothers had built the wooden fort themselves, crafted from lumber milled at the facility Hartley had purchased and reopened. Merle's Gas and Grill had expanded into the empty storefront next door, now serving breakfast and lunch to the construction workers rebuilding Main Street. Hartley stood at the edge of the celebration, watching. He looked different now, thinner, older somehow, but more solid, like someone who'd stopped running from his own shadow. The legal proceedings had taken their toll. He'd testified for 6 weeks, helping federal prosecutors build their case against the Dennison Group. In exchange, he'd received probation and community service, 500 hours to be served in Conway, Arkansas. The judge had called it poetic justice. Hartley called it going home. Quite a turnout, Caldwell said, appearing at his elbow. Yeah. Hartley watched Sarah pump her legs, climbing higher on the swing. I keep waiting for it to feel real. Does it? Not yet, but maybe that's okay. The work had been hard. Harder than building his real estate empire. Harder than making his first million. Because money could buy equipment and materials, but it couldn't buy trust. That had to be earned in inches. Showing up every day, doing the work, listening more than talking, accepting that some people would never forgive him, and that was their right. Dale Mercer had become an unlikely ally, helping navigate the complex relationships and old wounds that defined small-town life. Rosa's catering business now employed 6 people. The school had a new roof, new computers, new hope. Young families were starting to return, drawn by jobs and affordable housing and a community that was learning to invest in itself. Not everyone stayed. Some took Hartley's buyout offers, generous settlements for those who genuinely wanted to leave. But most remained, watching warily as their prodigal son tried to rebuild what he'd almost destroyed. Can I have everyone's attention? Old Pete called out, standing on a picnic table with the assistance of the Walton brothers. We have one more dedication today. The crowd gathered. Sarah abandoned her swing to stand with her mother. Merle wiped her hands on her apron, appearing from the food table. Agent Chen was there too. She'd developed a fondness for the town during the investigation, visiting on weekends to check on her case. Pete held up a wooden plaque, freshly carved. 15 years ago, on the night of the Great Flood, a stranger saved 8 lives. He pulled people from black water when nobody else would or could. He gave us second chances. Some of us used them well. Some of us wasted them. But all of us got to live because of him. Caldwell shifted uncomfortably. He'd never wanted recognition. And 3 months ago, Pete continued, that same man came back. Not because anyone asked him to, but because he decided some things are worth facing instead of running from. He helped us save this town a second time. Not from water, but from ourselves. From our fears and our failures and our inability to see that sometimes the people who hurt us are just people who were hurt themselves. The crowd was silent now. Even the children had gone still. John Caldwell, Pete said, we can't pay you back for what you've given us, but we can say thank you. And we can promise to honor your example by being the kind of people who pull others from the water instead of watching them drown. Applause erupted. Caldwell's face flushed. He wasn't good with attention, never had been. But Hartley was watching him with an expression Caldwell couldn't quite read. There's one more thing, Hartley said, stepping forward. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. I need to give you something. Something I should have given you 15 years ago. He opened the box. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a medal. Not military, not official. Just a simple bronze disc on a faded ribbon, engraved with words worn smooth by time and touch. My mother gave this to me the week before she died, Hartley said quietly. It was her father's, my grandfather's. He earned it in World War II not for killing the enemy, but for pulling 3 men from a burning tank under fire. He always said the medal wasn't for bravery. It was for choosing to see humanity in the middle of horror. He held it out to Caldwell. She told me to give it to someone who understood what it meant. I've carried it for 15 years, waiting to find that person. I didn't realize I'd already met him. Caldwell stared at the medal. James, I can't. You can. You did for me what my grandfather did for those soldiers. You saw a kid drowning and you didn't calculate the cost. You just pulled him out. And when I tried to destroy everything you'd saved, you pulled me out again. That's worth more than bronze and ribbon, but it's all I have to give. The medal changed hands. Caldwell felt its weight. Not heavy, but significant. The ribbon was frayed, the bronze tarnished, but the engraving was still legible. For choosing humanity in the midst of horror. Thank you, Caldwell said. His voice was rough. No, Hartley replied. Thank you. For everything. They stood there, the stranger and the prodigal son, while Conway celebrated around them. The playground filled with children. The smell of cider and wood smoke drifted on the November air. Leaves fell in golden spirals, carpeting the ground in autumn's promise that endings and beginnings were really the same thing. Sarah appeared between them, holding a paper cup of cider in each hand. Mama says you have to drink together, she announced. It's tradition for heroes. I'm not a hero, sweetheart, Caldwell said. That's what all the heroes say in my books. She handed them each a cup. Mama also says Mr. Hartley is staying forever now. Is that true? Hartley looked at Caldwell, at the medal, at the town spread out before them. Yeah, he said. I think it is. Good. You still need to help me with my science project. She ran off, leaving them smiling. She's relentless, Hartley observed. She's 7. It's her job. They drank the cider. It was sweet and tart and tasted like November in Arkansas. Crisp, clean, full of possibility. I've been thinking, Hartley said after a moment, about what comes next. The playground is done. The businesses are stabilizing. But Conway needs more than physical rebuilding. It needs, I don't know, a future. What kind of future? The kind where kids like Sarah don't have to leave to find opportunities. Where people like my mother don't die from poverty disguised as cancer. Where communities take care of each other before the water rises instead of after. Vision born from suffering. That's ambitious, Caldwell said. So is pulling 8 people from a flood. They watched the celebration. Agent Chen was teaching the Walton brothers' children how to do a proper cartwheel. Merle and Rosa were planning next week's menu, their friendship forged in crisis and tempered by hope. Dale Mercer was helping Pete down from the picnic table, the two of them laughing about something. "Are you staying too?" Hartley asked suddenly. "Or is this another stop before you run again?" Caldwell fingered the medal in his pocket. "I don't know. I've spent 15 years drifting. I'm not sure I know how to stay." "Neither was I, but I'm learning." "How?" "By deciding every morning that today I'll choose to be here. Tomorrow can worry about itself." The wisdom of one day at a time. As the sun began to set, painting the Arkansas sky in shades of amber and rose, Caldwell made a decision. Not a permanent one. He wasn't ready for that. But a decision to stay through winter, to see what Conway became, to watch Sarah grow, to help Hartley learn how to build instead of destroy, to finally stop running from the question that had haunted him for 15 years. Did saving people matter if they suffered anyway? Looking at this town, at these people, at the playground full of children who existed because someone chose humanity in the midst of horror, he thought maybe he finally had his answer. Yes, it mattered. It always mattered. As the celebration wound down and people began heading home, Caldwell started toward his truck. But something made him pause. A figure stood at the edge of the property, half hidden in shadow. Tall, unfamiliar, watching. When Caldwell looked directly at him, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the November dusk. "Did you see that?" Caldwell asked Hartley. "See what?" But the stranger was already gone. Caldwell fingered the metal again, a chill running down his spine. Because he'd spent 15 years learning to recognize when the past came calling. And something about that figure, the way he stood, the way he watched, felt like unfinished business, like another flood waiting to happen, like a story that wasn't quite finished yet. Winter came to Conway with the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath, because some mysteries resolve themselves not with answers, but with the courage to live without them. Caldwell stayed through December, helping winterize the new buildings, teaching Sarah how to identify bird tracks in the first snow, sitting with Hartley in Merle's diner while they planned spring projects. The stranger he'd seen at the playground dedication never reappeared, and gradually, Caldwell convinced himself it had been a trick of the light, a shadow, nothing more. But on Christmas Eve, everything changed. The package arrived at Merle's Gas and Grill, addressed to John Caldwell in handwriting he didn't recognize. Inside, a photograph, black and white, water-damaged, showing the night of the flood 15 years ago. In the image, a young Caldwell pulled someone from the water while another figure, barely visible in the darkness, helped from the bank. There had been someone else there that night, someone he'd forgotten. Caldwell showed the photograph to old Pete, whose hands trembled as he studied it. "That's Thomas Brennan," Pete whispered. "My God, I haven't thought about him in years. He was passing through Conway the night of the flood, helped with the rescue, disappeared the next morning before anyone could thank him." "Where did he go?" "Nobody knows. Some said he was running from the law. Others said he was just a drifter with ghosts of his own. But he saved lives that night, John. Just like you did." The revelation shifted everything. Caldwell had spent 15 years believing he alone had made those impossible choices, carried that weight alone. But there had been another stranger, another person who'd chosen humanity in the midst of horror. Another ghost still running. He never found Thomas Brennan. Searched for 3 weeks, following cold trails and dead ends, until Hartley finally sat him down in the diner and said the words Caldwell needed to hear. Maybe some people don't want to be found. Maybe they need to keep moving until they figure out how to stop. Maybe you have to let them go. Caldwell looked at the medal on the table between them, the one Hartley had given him, the one he still hadn't quite accepted he deserved. Is that what I'm doing? Running? No, Hartley said gently. You're choosing. Every day you stay here, you're choosing. That's different. The choice that matters most. On New Year's Eve, the whole town gathered in the community center. Sarah Martinez, now 8 years old and full of opinions, had organized a talent show. Dale Mercer played guitar. Rosa sang in Spanish. The Walton brothers performed a comedy sketch that was funnier than anyone expected. And when it was Caldwell's turn, he stood up with the medal in his hand. 15 years ago, he said, I pulled people from water and thought it made me a hero. Then I watched some of them suffer and thought it made me a failure. I spent a decade and a half running from the question of whether saving people mattered if they hurt anyway. The room was silent. But I've learned something here. Saving people isn't about guaranteeing their happiness. It's about giving them the choice to find it themselves. Some will, some won't. But the act of pulling them from the water, that matters. It always matters. He held up the medal. This belonged to a man who understood that, and I'm going to make sure it keeps belonging to people who do. He walked to where Hartley sat and placed the medal in his hands. You pulled yourself out, James. You chose humanity when it would have been easier to choose revenge. That's worth more than what I did. Because I acted on instinct. You acted on hope. Hartley's eyes filled with tears. I can't. You can. And when you find someone else who needs it, you'll pass it on. That's how this works. That's how we save each other. The medal changed hands again. The crowd erupted in applause, but Caldwell barely heard it. Because through the community center window, he saw a figure standing in the snow. Tall, unfamiliar, watching. Thomas Brennan. It had to be. Caldwell moved toward the door, but Hartley caught his arm. Let him go, Hartley said quietly. Some people need to stay ghosts a little longer. You of all people should understand that. Caldwell looked at his friend, this man who'd been saved twice, who was learning to save himself, and nodded. When he looked back at the window, the figure was gone. Vanished into the Arkansas winter like smoke. Spring came early that year. By March, the playground was surrounded by wildflowers. Sarah's science project won second place at the county fair. Merle's Diner appeared in a Little Rock magazine article about small-town revitalization. Conway wasn't saved. That would take years, maybe decades. But it was healing. And on a warm April morning, Caldwell loaded his truck and prepared to leave. Not running this time, just moving forward. Where will you go? Hartley asked, helping carry boxes. I don't know yet, but I heard about a town in Missouri that's struggling. Thought I might stop by, see if they need a hand. And if they ask who you are? Caldwell smiled. Just someone passing through. Sarah ran up, out of breath, holding something behind her back. You can't leave without this, she said, producing a crayon drawing. It showed a man in gray walking down a road, but this time the road led to a house with yellow windows. So you remember to come back. I'll remember, sweetheart. Promise? Promise. He hugged her, hugged Rosa, shook hands with Dale and the Waltons and old Pete. Merle pressed a thermos of coffee into his hands, same as she'd done for travelers for 30 years. Hartley walked him to the truck. "Thank you," Hartley said, "for everything. Thank you for giving me a reason to stop running. Will you really come back?" Caldwell looked at Conway, this town that had broken a boy and rebuilt a man, that had almost died and chosen to live, that had taught him the answer to his 15-year question. "Yeah," he said. "I think I will." The truck pulled away, dust rising behind it. In the rearview mirror, Caldwell watched the town shrink but never disappear. Watched Hartley standing in the road, holding the medal, ready to pass it on when the time came. And somewhere in the distance, maybe in Missouri or maybe somewhere else entirely, another stranger walked another road, carrying his own weight, looking for his own Conway. Some stories don't end. They just find new people to carry them forward. To this day, people in Conway still talk about the stranger who ordered just one cup of coffee and changed everything. They say if you sit in Merle's Gas and Grill on the anniversary of the flood, you might see a figure in gray sitting at the corner stool. Though when you look directly, he's never there. They say the medal still exists, passed hand to hand, stranger to stranger, a reminder that choosing humanity in the midst of horror is the only heroism that matters. And they say that sometimes, when the world feels like it's drowning, another stranger will appear, not to save you, but to remind you that you have the strength to save yourself. If this story moved you, do something with that feeling. Look for the stranger in your own life who needs pulling from the water. Be the person who chooses humanity when it's easier to look away. Because the real ending isn't written in these words. It's written in what you do next.